Welcome to Star Citizen and the guide for fuel gameplay.
You know this life keeps flying by. Let's stop the time.
In this guide, we will go into all the areas you need to refuel your ship, or even how you can help others with a tanker by selling fuel professionally and earn some UEC at the same time.
You bring sunshine to any cloudy day, just like magic, babe. Love it when we get together.
Because with the fuel gameplay, not only new possibilities are offered in the verse, but at the same time important prerequisites for future gameplay elements and mechanics, such as further playable systems, are implemented.
Life makes sense. Let's get together. We get together. We get together.
And as in every guide, you can jump directly to the parts that are of interest to you, or which you would like to see again, using the timestamps in the video.
From gray to colorful, crazy, wonderful. Love it when we get together.
We start with the first area, a refueling of your ship on a Starfarer. But first of all, a big thank you to the real ladies and gentlemen who made this video possible with their support as Patreons, channel members or Twitch subscribers. Thank you!
You feel lost for another life. You might lose the one you've got.
In order to refuel your ship away from a station or outpost, regardless of the size of the ship you are using, you will need a tanker that carries sufficient quantities of the necessary fuel, hydrogen or quantum, in its tanks.
It's a crooked line sometimes, but we're gonna find our way through the night. There's a light that will guide us. Even if it's straight through the fire, then we're gonna find our way home.
And currently, only the MISC Starfarer or the military variant Starfarer Gemini offers the possibility of supplying you with fuel. Provided, of course, that another player offers you this service. To be able to refuel, we must first mark a tanker ship, a Starfarer, as a target, whereby the T key is assigned here by default. We then fly to within a few 100 meters of the target and can then request docking clearance by pressing the N key by default. As soon as our target has extended its tank arm and we have received docking clearance, the docking interface appears, which we are already familiar with from docking with the 890 Jump, Hammerhead or Constellation. And here a manual docking is possible, as well as the automatic variant by holding down the N key. As soon as we have successfully docked, we can press the F1 key to enter our Mobiglass, where we will find the new menu under the Vehicle Maintenance service. On the left side we find the called prices for fuel, whereby the Starfarer pilot can assign these freely according to his own ideas. We find our internal tanks in the middle, where we can specify the desired amount of hydrogen fuel and quantum fuel via the thrust controls. After that, on the right-handed side, we find the resulting price for the amount of fuel we want. And following our confirmation, the refueling process starts as soon as the Starfarer's attendant opens the respective tanks and we pay UEC exactly what's end up in our tanks. A subsequent refueling fraud after confirmation is therefore not possible, but please make sure that the agreed price has remained correct even before confirmation and has not been adjusted at short notice. As soon as the refueling process begins, you will see your tank slowly fill up. Depending on the size of the tank, this may take a few minutes, but more details on this later. And with the completion of the refueling process, you have automatically paid what you have received in fuel, can undock and start the next mission. But of course, it is much more interesting to open a mobile space filling station yourself. And there are a few points to bear in mind here, since there are already a wide variety of special components. Different fuel nozzles and also different tanks, and also the prices for the fuel that we first have to buy and fill our tanks with can vary considerably.
Facing the wind is where you're going, not where you've been. Let's ride, saddle up, American style.
At first glance, the differences between the tank arms are rather minor, but in combination with the different fuel tanks, they can be adapted to special purposes.
While you're alive, so let's ride.
We can optimize the refueling process itself, for example, in terms of refueling time, or we can simply choose more safety.
Sign.
The most important point so far, however, is where we fill up our Starfarer and our 6 fuel tanks, since we do not yet have a refinery function in the ship, which we can only expect in the medium term. Once we have landed at a station or an outpost, we will then be able to use our Mobiglass in the vehicle maintenance service to fill not only our internal tanks as before, but also our 6 external tanks with either hydrogen or quantum fuel. And here's a tip: don't fill your tanks at one of the overpriced space stations, but use the refinery stations at the Lagrange points.
Let's ride. Let's ride.
Because where we pay just under half for the same material, which of course also brings us much more higher profit when selling our fuel.
Saddle up, American style. Let's ride.
Because at the space station we would have paid almost 130,000 Alpha UEC for a full tank of quantum.
Land of the free where the eagle flies. Let's ride.
As soon as we have confirmed the payment, the refueling process of our 6 fuel tanks starts, depending on which fuel we have selected and paid for the respective tank. However, refueling can take some time, and the fresh coffee is definitely included here.
We are only friends on a spinning wheel.
As soon as we have taken in the desired amount of fuel, we are ready to supply our broken down teammates or our fleet members. We currently recommend filling only one tank with quantum, as the consumption here is rather limited and the high price here means a great risk of loss. As soon as we receive a docking request, we can either accept or decline it, whereby we must first extend our arm for the refueling process so that our customer can then dock. An abort of the docking process or a continuation of the flight is always possible, should problems or an emergency arise. Optionally, it makes sense to have 2 people on board, with the pilot handling the inquiries and the refueling attendant, well, refueling. At the fuel console, which is located in the cockpit of the Starfarer, we can set and adjust our desired price for the fuel for sale on the left side. Find all the data about the dock chip and the player in the middle left area, and the current fill levels of our tanks in the middle right area. In the lower area, we then get an overview of the desired amount of fuel and the agreed price. Via the Pop Manager button, we can switch to a detailed view for refueling, whereby the right-handed side is particularly interesting, as here we can view and set the flow rate and open or close our nozzle. In the lower overview, we again receive information on how much fuel has already been delivered and how long the refueling process will take at the current flow rate. In addition, we can directly set the individual tanks to be opened, closed or sucked in order to fill individual tanks with others if necessary. And as soon as the refueling process is complete, we receive another confirmation and an automated payment. After this, the customer can undock and the transaction is completed, or we can retract our tank arm, which also leads to an automatic undocking. And should the refueling process be interrupted permanently, regardless of which side, only what was actually transferred to the customer's vessel is paid. But of course, refueling is not without danger, especially if the wrong flow rate is chosen. This can even lead to a loss of the tank arm, or worse. If we increase the pressure above the safe flow rate, the excess fuel would simply flow into space and the integrity of our tank arm will also decrease further. Another note: we can only have one type of fuel flowing out at a time, and we can use multiple tanks to do this. This then also increases the pressure when we have several tanks open at the same time. And the integrity remains at the damage level and does not regenerate. As soon as the value then falls below the critical range, we ultimately suffer irreparable damage on the side, after which we will lose the tank completely and only have to replace it again at great expense by means of a repair. Having looked as a tanker as a customer, as well as a fuel mogul, let's take a look at how we can use a tanker to refuel a tanker, for example, to create a supply chain, or simply to prepare to transport fuel over long distances in the future. The basic principle remains the same, as a tanker can also dock with a tanker, but here we get the additional option of filling the external tanks directly via the system. And since the pricing is up to us, we can of course also set it to almost zero for friends or fleet members, or even for a supply line, in order to enable fleet operations and remote explorations even without profit. And after transferring a considerable amount of fuel in this case, we take a closer look at the simulation of flow rates and pressure. This varies depending on the fill level of the target container, the pressure and fill level of the source container, and the flow rate. Furthermore, we can influence the pressure by adding several tanks, or we can reduce the pressure by switching off individual tanks. For example, the flow rate varies significantly as the source tank becomes emptier and the destination tank becomes fuller. Through the pressure ratios, we can therefore actively intervene in the fuel supply and optimize it. However, we have no influence on this as the target if we ourselves are refueled accordingly with empty tanks. In addition, the duration of a complete refueling of 6 tanks is even longer than with an initial refueling at a station. Thus, we are defenseless for several minutes without an escort. In this example, we have already spent several minutes with only a single tank that is not completely empty. In summary, the new tank mechanics offer a lot of new gameplay, but above all necessary prerequisites for further systems. Finally, thanks to the Railway Time and Launch for their support. See you again, and as always, see you in the verse.
Break my stride.